deliberately left the safe, containing millions of dollars, ajar, hoping to catch the maid in the act. But what that poor girl did would change him forever. Harold Winters wasn't always a man of silence. In another life, when his name was emblazoned on mighty ships, on gleaming brass plaques, and when his voice thundered so powerfully that even Washington politicians bowed to listen, he spoke with the authority of a storm. But that life belonged to the distant past, buried beneath layers of loss, betrayal, and relentless disappointment. Now, at just 39, silence was the only thing Harold truly trusted. Silence never lies. Silence never demands money. And above all, silence never pretends to love you. So Harold lived in a grand house, built more for watching than for living. A fortress of red brick and stately white columns, tucked behind ornate black iron fences in the wealthy suburbs of Savannah, Georgia. The mansion was so vast that a first-time visitor could easily get lost. 26 spacious rooms, 16 security cameras hidden in every shadowed corner, 3 emergency buttons concealed throughout the house. Yet not a single soul ever walked its halls, except Harold. Locals whispered about him with a mix of awe and wariness. A young, rich man who's so odd he surrounds himself with prison-like security, they'd say. He even fired his gardener last week just for asking a few, personal questions. But they knew nothing. They'd never witnessed his own son filing suit to have him declared mentally incapacitated, all to drain the family trust. They'd never opened their bank statements to find $100,000 stolen, vanishing at the hands of the very daughter he'd nursed through fevers and nightmares. Nor had they ever felt the chill of discovering that the family doctor, trusted without question for 2 decades, had siphoned off tens of thousands of dollars through forged bills, then quietly slipped away when exposed. Harold had endured it all. Those experiences taught him one thing. People are vultures in expensive suits, or sometimes in noble white coats, but rotten to the core. There was a time when Harold knew joy and warmth. His wife, Miriam, the woman who'd stood by him when they had nothing, was the heart that brought life to this house. She loved the bright sunflowers in the foyer, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifting through every room. Miriam had turned this lavish mansion into a true home. But a merciless cancer stole Miriam from Harold, slowly and painfully, just as it had extinguished the hope in his heart. Since her passing, the once majestic estate had become a silent tomb, devoid of color, devoid of fragrance. Harold refused to repaint a single wall or touch any of Miriam's belongings, except for one, the library, her favorite room. The library was an expansive space lined with floor to ceiling bookshelves, the leather armchairs faded with age, and a writing desk facing the window where Miriam used to sit each morning, her golden hair glowing like the first light of dawn. Harold hadn't opened a book in years, yet he meticulously dusted every spine and polished every pane of glass in that room every day. He told himself it was for Miriam. Harold's daily life followed a bizarrely rigid schedule. Coffee at 6 o'clock, oatmeal at 6:30, a brief email check at 7, then long stretches of solemn silence interrupted only by mechanical scans of the security monitors. The kitchen stood fully stocked, but Harold rarely cooked. Meals were delivered by a service whose drivers he never met. The man who once oversaw an international shipping empire now busied himself with inspecting each apple for bruises, suspicious of every delivery passing through the frosted glass. Youth is supposed to be a time of happiness, but for Harold, 39, brought only unease and self-defense. He had lost his wife, been betrayed by his children, been swindled by his family doctor and personal assistant. All of it had forged him into a wealthy young man who lived as a recluse in his own castle of solitude. He had come to understand one stark truth. Money and power can buy almost everything, but they can't buy honesty, they can't buy love, and they can't stop betrayal. Harold Winters, 39 years old, still rich, still powerful, was left with nothing but this cold silence and a suspicion that clung to every breath. He had no idea that, in just a few days, a fateful encounter would turn everything he believed upside down. Forever. Harold had always believed that silence was the only loyal friend left in his life. Yet, as darkness slowly crept over the windows and the cold house grew quieter than ever, he found that this very silence felt heavier, more terrifying. It reminded Harold of himself, a young, successful man who'd chosen to cut himself off from every social connection. It was the price he paid to shield himself from the deep wounds of the past, wounds never healed and perhaps never healable. Whenever he walked through the sprawling mansion, Harold still heard echoes of happier days when Miriam was by his side. But now those memories were faded and icy, like the marble walls that radiated chill even in Savannah's blazing summer. The soft giggles, the warm embraces, the smell of fresh-baked bread. They'd all become ghostly shadows of a distant past. That past had been destroyed by those closest to him. The day he learned the heartbreaking truth that his own son, the boy he once cradled in his arms as a newborn, had sued him to seize his inheritance, Harold's heart shattered into 1,000 fragments. But the pain didn't end there. A few months later, he discovered that his daughter, the little girl he used to carry on his shoulders through town, the one who sobbed every time he went away, had secretly withdrawn $100,000 from his bank account. She left him a hastily written note, its words cold and razor sharp. "I needed the money. You wouldn't understand. Please don't look for me." Each line felt like a dagger to his young heart, yet the deepest wound came from his family doctor, Martin Grayson, his trusted physician for over 20 years, the man Harold regarded as a second father, whom he'd trusted with his life. When he uncovered that Dr. Grayson had quietly siphoned off his funds through bogus treatment bills, Harold's world collapsed. After those betrayals, Harold trusted no one. He erected a psychological fortress, bricks of disappointment, mortar of suspicion and steel, cold doubt about people's true nature. His world shrank to the walls of his mansion, the only place he fully controlled, where no one could ever hurt him again. Harold began to view the outside world through security monitor screens, cameras installed everywhere from the front gate and living room to the kitchen and the long corridor leading to the hidden safe room. He lived in constant dread, convinced that every odd noise or unfamiliar vehicle could signal a threat. Housekeepers and gardeners came and went in a matter of months. None lasted long, for Harold questioned even their smallest actions. A few weeks ago, he'd fired the last gardener, a young man named Alex, all because of one seemingly harmless question. Alex had casually asked, "Mr. Winters, I've noticed you haven't been going out much lately. Are you all right?" But that simple inquiry startled Harold as if it had touched a deep, buried fear. He immediately suspected Alex of dark intentions, probing for weaknesses in some secret plot. Without a word of explanation or debate, Harold ordered Alex to leave at once, leaving the young man bewildered outside the heavy iron gates, clueless about what had gone wrong. After that incident, Harold's vigilance only intensified. He hired a professional security team to monitor the estate more closely, and upgraded cameras and motion sensors in every corner. His life had become that of a prisoner in his own castle, a splendid fortress devoid of any human warmth. Yet amid all the loss and mistrust, the library remained the only room Harold never dared disturb. He left it exactly as Miriam had arranged, the heavy oak desk, shelves of books ordered by her taste, and the worn brown leather chair where she used to sit on sunny mornings. To Harold, that library was a sacred sanctuary, the one place in the house where he could feel Miriam's gentle presence, where he could remember a time when he still believed in love and in people. But Harold didn't know that no matter how many defenses he built around his heart, life would always find a way to test him anew. A test that would shake even the sturdiest walls he'd painstakingly erected within his soul. In just a few days, an unexpected meeting with a young woman named Jada Harris would force Harold to question every belief he thought he'd lost forever. And the wall of suspicion he'd built brick by brick would begin to show its first cracks that would change his life completely. When the first cracks began to appear in the fortress of doubt that Harold had so painstakingly constructed, a strange weariness crept into his mind, a relentless feeling that refused to let him go. The relentless grind of endless contracts and back-to-back meetings on his computer screen was draining Harold's strength. He had once believed he could endure anything, as long as he never had to face another human being directly. But his youthful body was beginning to betray him. Headaches came more frequently. His eyes grew weary from sleepless nights, and an emptiness clung to him whenever night fell. At his lowest ebb, Harold made a decision he'd never imagined. He'd hire a housekeeper. For Harold, this wasn't a simple choice. It was like opening the door to his fortress, an act he had always avoided, a risk fraught with anxiety. But his health forced him to relent. He contacted a reputable staffing agency in Atlanta and laid out demands so exacting they seemed almost absurd. No criminal record, no social, media use, minimal conversation, and, above all, no curiosity about the employer's private life. Harold believed these conditions would safeguard his privacy and the isolation he prized. A few days later, the agency sent him 3 profiles. Harold dismissed the first 2 almost immediately over trivial mismatches. Finally, he picked up the third, a 27-year-old woman named Jada Harris. Her resume was succinct and unadorned, free of extraneous personal details. According to the description, Jada was punctual, meticulous, and intensely focused on her work. What caught Harold's eye was the last line. Driven by purpose, not profit. He snorted, a reminder of the empty slogans he no longer believed. On Tuesday morning, Harold watched through a security monitor as a young woman stepped off a shabby bus, crossed the street, and walked directly to the front gate. Jada Harris was slight of build, her curly hair tied back with a pale scarf, wearing no makeup or jewelry. She moved with a calm confidence, as though she'd mastered the art of adapting to any situation. The moment Harold opened the door to let Jada in, he felt something unfamiliar. Not his usual suspicion, nor exactly a warm welcome, but an irresistible curiosity. Jada's face was composed. Her dark eyes met his with steady, polite directness. She bowed her head in greeting and stood still, waiting for him to invite her inside, as if she knew his boundaries and respected them. Harold led her to the living room, where slanting rays of weak sunlight revealed motes of dust dancing in the air. He offered her the deep brown velvet sofa. He took the seat opposite. Before he could speak, Jada asked in a clear, earnest voice, "Mr. Winters, may I clarify one thing before we begin? The library is listed as the most important room in the house. When I'm working, would you prefer that I only dust the shelves and objects? Or would you like me to rearrange the books by spine height for a neater appearance?" Her direct, thoughtful question froze Harold for a moment. This was the first time anyone had asked such a specific, considerate question on day 1. Most candidates had only inquired about salary or days off, seldom about the fine details of the job. Jada's composed maturity impressed him. "No need to rearrange the books," Harold replied, striving for an even tone. "Just dust them. I want everything in the library to remain exactly as it is." Jada nodded, jotted down notes in her small notebook, then moved on to ask about other specifications. Harold observed her throughout the 17-minute interview. She never pried into his personal life, never forced a veneer of friendliness, and maintained a strictly professional demeanor. When the interview ended, Harold saw her out at the gate. As Jada walked away, he realized he'd been watching her silhouette. Simple, composed, for a long time. A strange feeling stirred within him, a flicker of hope mixed with unspoken apprehension. Could this genuine young woman really be different from all the others who had crossed his threshold? Reluctantly, Harold admitted to himself that he had let a stranger slip past the most secure wall he'd ever built around his heart. And no matter what his reason told him, he could not stop placing that fragile trust in the newcomer to his life, Jada Harris. Though he didn't want to admit it, Harold knew he had just let a stranger inch closer to the most fortified wall around his heart. And no matter how loudly reason warned him otherwise, he could not stop placing that fragile trust in the young woman who had just stepped into his life, Jada Harris. Yet before that spark of hope could even ignite, his familiar doubts surged up within him, as powerful and violent as an undercurrent at the ocean's floor. Whenever Harold began to trust someone, the past rushed back to remind him of the bitter consequences of misplaced faith. Every person who'd ever crossed the threshold of this house, everyone who'd shown kindness and honesty, had ultimately been undone by greed and selfishness. Harold had seen it too many times to trust easily again. That very night, Harold decided to enact a plan that had helped him dismiss dozens of previous employees. He would set a trap to test Jada's honesty. He didn't want to do it, but it was the only way to know for sure whether her integrity was genuine or just a clever ruse by someone plotting to exploit him. The next morning, before Jada arrived for her first day, Harold stood before the secret room at the end of the east wing. He slowly entered the code into the large safe. Inside lay neatly stacked cash, gold and diamond jewelry boxes, property deeds, and several priceless mementos. He had deliberately placed these treasures in plain sight, an irresistible invitation to anyone with even the smallest greed. After propping the safe door ajar, he carefully set a small slip of paper with the code on the nearby table, all staged to look like a careless oversight. Back in his private surveillance room, lined with monitors watching every corner of the estate, Harold sank into his familiar leather chair, heart pounding faster than usual. He told himself not to expect anything from this newcomer, yet his heart refused to listen. He both hoped Jada would prove herself honest and feared the sting of disappointment once again. Exactly at 8 o'clock, Jada entered the gates right on time, her face calm and untroubled. Harold stared at the screen, scrutinizing her every move. From the first moment, she worked with meticulous focus, never hesitating, never glancing curiously at the valuables scattered through the grand living room. For the first hour, she concentrated solely on her cleaning duties, dusting, straightening, not once showing any sign of suspicion. Harold felt a fleeting relief, but quickly reminded himself this was only the beginning. Previous employees had started just as earnestly, only to succumb to temptation later on. Then came the crucial moment. Jada walked down the east hallway toward the secret safe room. Harold held his breath, tension crushing him as she paused at the open safe door. Through the camera, he watched her stand motionless for several seconds, clearly hesitating at the sight of the treasures displayed before her. Harold clenched his fist, his heart pounding. She stepped a little closer, peered inside, and her hand trembled. Harold felt disappointment creeping in. He'd seen so many crumble under this test, and he feared Jada would be no different. But she did not step inside or touch anything. Instead, Jada promptly pulled out her phone, stepped back into the hallway, and placed a call. Harold panned the camera to read her lips as best he could. From her mouth movements, he realized she was calling his secretary to report the safe had been left open and asking whether she should lock it or wait for the owner's return. Harold sat frozen, utterly surprised by her professional, correct response. For the first time in years, he saw someone confronted with such a test, yet refusing to let greed override reason. His suspicion gave way to surprise, laced with appreciation, though he quickly reminded himself not to leap to conclusions. He continued to watch, his heart still not entirely at ease. Harold wondered, was this part of a more elaborate plan, or was Jada truly one of the rare honest souls? Time crawled by in the surveillance room as he sat motionless, observing her every subtle move. Something was beginning to change inside this perpetually wary man, but whether it was strong enough to shatter the thick walls of his doubt remained to be seen. Time passed slowly in the surveillance room, where Harold sat motionless, eyes glued to the monitors as he watched Jada's every move. Something was beginning to shift in the heart of this endlessly suspicious man, but whether that change would prove strong enough to breach the thick wall of his doubt, he still didn't know. Under the soft glow of the hallway light, Jada stood perfectly still in front of the slightly ajar safe room door, her gaze fixed on the neatly stacked cash and glittering jewelry boxes illuminated by the dim light. Tiny beads of sweat dotted her skin, and Harold, scrutinizing her through the camera, could clearly see the tension in her eyes. Jada did not enter. Instead, she leaned back against the hallway wall, trying to steady herself after calling Harold's secretary to report the odd situation she'd just uncovered. She exhaled deeply, closed her eyes for a moment to reassure herself that she'd done the right thing and that there was nothing to fear. But just as she began to calm down, her phone vibrated in her pocket, yanking her back to reality. She pulled it out. The screen read, "Mom calling." Jada's heart sank. She knew her mother wouldn't call at this hour unless something serious was wrong. She answered immediately, her mother's voice trembling with worry. "Jada, I don't know what to do. The bank just called and said, if we don't pay $38,000 this week, they'll seal the store. This grocery shop is your father's life's work. I've done everything I can, but I'm out of options." Jada gripped the phone, each of her mother's words feeling like an invisible blade slicing into her heart. That little grocery store had been built by her parents' bare hands and was the family's only livelihood. Memories of her father rising at 4 a.m. to stock shelves and her mother standing behind the register from dawn till dusk flooded her mind. "Please don't cry. I'll figure something out," Jada stammered, trying to comfort her mother, even though she felt completely powerless herself. After hanging up, Jada stood in the hallway, eyes downcast, desperation and fear washing over her. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly weak against her circumstances, unable to protect her family. Then her gaze drifted back to the open safe room. A thought shot through her mind, making her flinch in horror. If she just stepped in and took a small amount from those millions, her parents' store could be saved. No one would suspect. That tiny sum would be insignificant compared to Harold's fortune. Just this once, she could save her family from bankruptcy. But the thought was gone as soon as it arrived. She knew it wasn't who she was, that it contradicted the values her parents had instilled in her. Jada steeled herself to resist the temptation, even though it felt more powerful than ever. In the surveillance room, Harold watched her every expression. He saw her lips tremble, her fist clench at her side. He knew this moment would decide everything, whether Jada could withstand the toughest test of all, honesty in the face of overwhelming temptation. Jada took a step toward the safe room door, her heart pounding like it might burst. She placed her hand on the cold steel and looked once more at the bundles of cash and jewelry. But instead of stepping inside, she reached for the small slip of paper bearing the code that Harold had deliberately placed beside the safe. With a look of fierce resolve, she punched in a random sequence on the keypad, locking the safe. The safe emitted a sharp beep, and its door clicked shut. Jada stood before the locked door, exhaling in relief and anguish. She carefully folded the code slip and tucked it deep into her pocket, ensuring no one else could find it. Then she walked to a nearby wooden chair, sat down, covered her face with her hands, and wept in silence. In the surveillance room, Harold remained frozen. He had seen everything, and his heart stirred in a way it hadn't in years. Jada had not only passed his honesty test, but had overcome a far more brutal challenge than he ever imagined. In that moment he felt a pang of shame for doubting her. Yet deep inside, Harold knew this was only the beginning. He couldn't fully trust someone overnight. But for the first time in many years, he realized something had awakened in him. Something close to respect, even trust. A feeling he thought he'd lost forever. In the surveillance room, Harold sat frozen. He had witnessed everything that had just happened, and his heart suddenly stirred with a force he hadn't felt in years. This young woman had not only passed his honesty test, but had also surmounted a far harsher challenge, one even Harold hadn't anticipated. In that moment, he felt a twinge of shame for having doubted her. But deep down, Harold knew this was only the first step. He still couldn't fully trust anyone at once. Yet, for the first time in many years, he realized that something very close to respect and even trust had begun to take root in his heart, something he believed he'd lost forever. Harold's eyes remained glued to the security monitor as he studied every flicker of expression on Jada's face during that tense moment. There, she sat on the small wooden chair opposite the now locked safe. Her hands were clenched tightly, her shoulders trembling with each steady, deep breath as she fought back the tears that silently slipped down her cheeks. A moment of intense inner conflict had passed, but Harold knew this test was far from over. He remembered all too well the previous times he'd tested the honesty of his staff. Most, having resisted temptation at first, eventually gave in. Faced with such a vast fortune, too many lacked the strength to uphold their integrity. Harold knew he couldn't let his guard down. He continued to watch Jada, still wary. Time dragged on. The clock on the surveillance room wall ticked forward in laborious slowness, and Harold didn't take his eyes off the screen for a single minute. Yet Jada, having composed herself, showed no sign of leaving. Instead of rising and walking away, she remained seated, her gaze calm and fixed on the safe's door, as if silently vowing that no harm would come of it. An hour passed, then 2. Still, Jada sat unwavering. Harold could hardly conceal his astonishment at her steadfast resolve. Not only had she rebuffed temptation from the start, but she had also taken on the role of a true guardian, refusing to let anyone exploit the opportunity. Harold began to wonder about Jada's true character, something he'd never done with anyone else. He had always believed that under pressure, anyone would choose the easy path, even if wrong. But Jada was proving him wrong. He couldn't look away from her quiet, determined presence. Through the camera, Harold watched Jada slip into a private reverie. She did nothing but sit there, her eyes fixed on the safe's door, as though she feared that if she blinked, something might go amiss. Suddenly, Harold felt curious about Jada's life. What had forged that remarkable resolve and integrity? He recalled her call from her mother earlier, the worry and despair in her voice that he'd glimpsed through the monitor. He wondered what Jada was thinking now. Was she regretting her decision? Hesitating? But when he saw her composed, resolute face, he understood she felt no regret. For a brief instant, Harold felt ashamed of himself for orchestrating this test to prove no one was worthy of trust. Now, paradoxically, he realized it was he who was unworthy, someone who habitually doubted and scrutinized others instead of offering trust and allowing himself to see the good in people. Yet Harold's doubts did not vanish entirely. His true challenge went beyond this one test of Jada. He needed to be absolutely certain to see how far she would go under the greatest pressure. Deep inside, he still wanted to find her limits. Then, something unexpected stirred within him. Hope. He hoped Jada would remain as strong as she had been these past hours. He hoped she would not disappoint him like so many before. And most of all, for the first time in years spent in suspicion, Harold felt his heart beginning to open, a gentle sensation he had never known before. Outside, the light faded and darkness crept over the estate, but Jada remained seated in silent vigilance like a devoted protector. And Harold, still locked in the surveillance room, continued to watch the young woman on his screen. The most intense moment had passed, but Harold knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. Outside, the sun was fading, and darkness was beginning to swallow the house, but Jada remained seated there, silent and steadfast like a devoted guardian. Harold, meanwhile, sat in the surveillance room, eyes glued to the camera feed watching the young woman. The most tense moment had passed, but Harold knew that his life would never be the same again. When the clock struck 6, Harold decided it was time to end his test. He rose and left the surveillance room with a heavy but oddly excited step. As he descended the stairs, he intentionally made a few soft noises to announce his return. In his heart, he knew that everything from this moment on would hinge on how the young woman faced him. The instant Jada heard his footsteps, she sprang to her feet, smoothing the calm expression she'd been wearing, though she couldn't completely hide the exhaustion from hours of tense vigilance. Harold appeared before her, feigning the stern demeanor of someone just home from a long meeting, though with a slightly softer edge than usual. "Miss Harris," Harold said in a gentle yet clear voice, "you're still here?" Jada drew a deep breath, her reply trembling just a bit. "Mr. Winters, I discovered your safe door was open. I contacted your secretary to report it and decided to stay until you returned to ensure everything remained secure." Harold looked straight into her eyes and saw genuine honesty there. He nodded once, striving for a neutral tone. "I know." Jada's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. You knew?" Harold hesitated for a moment, then decided it was time to reveal everything. "I have cameras installed throughout the house. I've been watching your every move all day." A brief silence hung between them as Jada processed his words. She felt a pang of hurt at having been subjected to a test, but she quickly recovered, meeting his gaze with calm resolve. "I understand, sir. This is your home and you have every right to do so." Harold felt his heart race as he stepped closer, speaking with more warmth than ever before. "Jada, I've seen your honesty and determination today. Honestly, I'm deeply impressed and grateful. I want to reward you for that." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small white envelope, inside which was a $50,000 check, offering it to her with a sincere look. "This is the reward you deserve. Please don't refuse." Jada glanced down at the envelope, a swirl of conflicting emotions raising within her. After a moment, she gently shook her head and pushed the envelope back toward him. her voice firm yet gentle. "Mr. Winters, I appreciate your generosity, but I cannot accept this. I did what any honest, responsible person should do. It's not something deserving of a large sum like this." Harold was genuinely astonished. He had never met anyone who refused such a large gift, especially knowing the difficulties Jada faced. He pressed on, unable to hide his surprise. "Are you sure, Jada? I know your family is in need, and this money could help you greatly." Jada offered a soft, sincere smile. "I do need the money, but not in this way. I've lived my life believing that doing what's right must always come before personal gain." Something powerful stirred in Harold's heart. He looked into her eyes and asked almost impulsively, "Why are you so steadfast, Jada? What makes you hold on to your principles so firmly?" Jada was silent for a moment, then chose to share what she'd kept hidden. "Mr. Winters, I've never had the chance to tell you this. A few years ago, my cousin Paco was born with a serious heart condition and needed an expensive surgery we couldn't afford. We were desperate, until a hospital donor paid the entire bill anonymously. My family was so grateful, but we never knew who did it." Harold's heart pounded as he listened. "A few months later, I saw your name on the hospital's list of major donors. I researched and discovered you were the one who saved Paco's life. I've never forgotten it. When I learned I'd be working for you, I promised myself I would do everything in my power to repay the person who saved my cousin. Today, I was only keeping that promise." Harold was stunned. Memories long buried flooded back. Indeed, years ago he had secretly given a large donation to the local hospital, but he never imagined he would meet someone whose life he had saved, especially under these circumstances. The room went silent for a long moment. Finally, Harold nodded slowly, his eyes filled with emotion and respect. "Thank you for telling me this, Jada. I had no idea." In that instant, Harold realized that the wall of suspicion he'd spent years building had been completely torn down, and the one who destroyed it was the young, genuine woman standing before him. In that moment, Harold realized that the wall of suspicion he had spent so many years building had been completely torn down, and the one who destroyed it was none other than the young, genuine woman standing before him. Yet, as he looked deep into Jada's sincere, dignified eyes, Harold felt a burden he had never expected to face, the weight of shame. Her recent confession made him all too aware that he had long viewed the world through such a mistrustful lens that he had lost the ability to recognize true kindness. After a brief hesitation, Harold spoke in a low, conflicted voice. "Jada, there's one more thing I need to tell you. I feel I must confess this before we can move forward. It's something I've never shared with anyone, and you may feel hurt or disappointed, but I truly owe you an explanation." Jada furrowed her brow, sensing the unusual seriousness in this typically guarded, inscrutable man. She replied softly, "Please, go on. I'm listening." Harold drew a deep breath, then met her gaze with eyes full of remorse and regret. "Before I decided to hire you, I actually hired a private investigator to look into you very thoroughly. I asked him to follow your daily life for several weeks." Jada stared at him, wide-eyed with shock and confusion. She had never imagined Harold's mistrust would go so far as secretly surveilling her private life. A pang of sadness and a touch of betrayal rose in her as she thought of every step and every small action observed. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Why would you do that, Mr. Winters? I've never given you any reason to doubt me like that." Harold sighed, his gaze distant as he reflected on his painful past, his voice heavy with self-reproach. "I know, and I'm sorry. But you must understand, I've been betrayed so many times in my life. My son, my daughter, the people I trusted most, they all shattered my faith in me. Even the physician I'd trusted for 20 years betrayed me. All of that left me too afraid to trust anyone. So when I saw your resume, I felt I needed absolute certainty. I did this to everyone before, but now I feel more guilty than ever, because the one I doubted was you. Jada was silent for a long moment, emotions warring within her. She understood Harold wasn't evil, but his actions were hard to accept at once. After careful thought, she spoke quietly. I can somewhat understand why you did it, Mr. Winters, but each of us deserves to be judged by our own actions, not by unfounded suspicions or past betrayals. I don't blame you, but I truly hope you won't have to do that again. Harold nodded slowly, his eyes showing genuine remorse. I understand, and I am truly sorry. I never meant for you to be hurt by my mistrust. Your actions today showed me how wrong I've been to live in doubt. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, Jada. A gentle silence settled over the room. Then Harold suddenly walked to his desk and retrieved a thick dossier wrapped carefully in a luxurious leather cover. Turning back to her, he looked at Jada with solemn sincerity. There's an important decision I've been wrestling with ever since I started observing you, and today clarified it for me. Jada looked startled, her eyes fixed on the folder in his hand. Before she could speak, Harold continued confidently. This is the file for the Winters Charity Foundation, the nonprofit I established after Miriam passed away. For years, I've been its sole director because I never found anyone trustworthy enough to hand it over to, until now. Today, I want to give you full responsibility for running it. Jada was speechless, staring at him in disbelief. Mr. Winters, that's an enormous responsibility. I'm just a housekeeper. How could I accept this? Harold offered a warm, genuine smile, the first such expression she'd ever seen on his usually stern face. You are not just any housekeeper. You are the most honest, courageous, and capable person I've ever met. You are the one who truly deserves to lead this foundation, to help those who need it most. I trust you completely, Jada. Overwhelmed, Jada accepted the dossier with pride and gratitude shining in her eyes. In that moment, she realized fate had brought her to Harold, not only to repay the life debt owed for saving her cousin, but also to open a new, meaningful chapter in both of their lives. She looked him in the eye and nodded with firm determination. I promise I will not let you down, Mr. Winters. Harold smiled with heartfelt warmth. For the first time in many years, he felt his heart truly heal, and the wall of suspicion he had built so tightly around himself crumbled entirely before the integrity of the young woman standing before him. Harold smiled sincerely. For the first time in many years, he felt his heart truly heal, and the wall of suspicion he'd built had completely crumbled beneath the honesty of the young woman standing before him. However, for Jada, the happiness of earning Harold's trust quickly gave way to a heavy sense of pressure. She looked down at the thick dossier in her hands, pages filled with complex numbers, large-scale charity projects spanning the country, and intricate legal procedures. For someone who had never run an organization of this size, the task seemed beyond her imagination. Jada took a deep breath, her eyes full of worry and hesitation. She looked up at Harold and spoke softly but with evident anxiety. Mr. Winters, I'm deeply grateful for your trust, but this is truly an enormous responsibility. I've never run any organization before, and I haven't even finished my master's program. Are you sure I can handle this? Harold stepped closer and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes full of empathy yet unwavering determination. Jada, I understand exactly how you feel right now. I was the same way when I first set up this foundation after Miriam passed away. I questioned myself hundreds of times, wondering if I was fooling myself by thinking a solitary man like me could do something meaningful for society. But then I realized that when we act with a sincere heart and pure intentions, the ability to succeed naturally follows. Jada listened to every word, feeling warmth and reassurance return, but the fear still lingered. She hesitated, her voice tinged with doubt. But, Mr. Winters, running a foundation of this scale isn't just about heart or willpower. It's about financial accountability and life or death decisions for hundreds, even thousands of people. I'm afraid that if I make a mistake, the people who need help will suffer the consequences. Harold nodded quietly, looking at Jada with seriousness and understanding. He knew her fear better than anyone, for he had felt it himself. After a thoughtful pause, he decided he needed to share more about why this decision mattered so deeply. Jada, I know this scares you, but please understand that this decision wasn't made lightly. I've observed you very closely, not just today, but over a long period. You're not only honest and kind, you understand the true value of every dollar, of every small but significant action. Only someone who has faced hardship can fully grasp the meaning of helping others. That's why I chose you. Harold's eyes lit up, and for the first time he spoke with genuine warmth and conviction. His voice lost its usual cold distance, and instead brimmed with passion and belief. I will always be by your side, guiding you step by step. I will teach you everything I know, from financial management and staff coordination to handling legal matters and evaluating charitable projects. But most importantly, I've seen in you the ability to put others before yourself, something very few people can do, especially when they hold power and wealth. You possess that rare quality, Jada. Jada felt her heart stirred deeply at his heartfelt words. His sincerity made her feel the true weight of the responsibility he was entrusting to her. After a long silence, Jada lifted her head to look at Harold, her eyes regaining some of their resolve. I really can't be certain I'll meet your expectations, but if you've placed such great trust in me, I will do my very best. I promise you, no matter what, I will work with all my dedication and honesty to honor your faith in me. Harold gave a relieved smile, rare warmth shining in his eyes. He knew this was the best decision he had made in years. He reached out, taking Jada's hand firmly, his voice full of confidence. I believe you will succeed, and I understand this isn't an easy responsibility. But Jada, it's the toughest challenges that help us grow stronger and learn how to bring positive change to many lives. You will never be alone on this journey. Jada's eyes brightened, the pressure easing into a newfound confidence. She understood that from this moment on her life would turn a completely new page, one filled with responsibility, challenges, but also deep meaning and value. Clutching the Winters Charity Foundation dossier in her hands, Jada knew that the great mission Harold had just entrusted to her was more than a job. It was a vow between her and Harold, a continuation of a beautiful story, and an opportunity for her to use her life to spread goodness to those who truly needed help. As for Harold, seeing the determination in Jada's eyes, he realized one thing with absolute clarity. His bold decision was not only about giving responsibility, but about giving trust, something he thought he had lost forever. Clutching the Winters Charity Foundation dossier in her hands, Jada knew that the great mission Harold had entrusted to her was far more than a mere job. It was a pledge between her and Harold, a continuation of a beautiful story, and an opportunity for her to use her life to spread goodness to those who truly needed help. In those first days, Jada immersed herself in research and learning. She was nearly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. Complex financial reports, detailed files on past charity projects, and hundreds of emails from organizations and individuals in urgent need of assistance. But whenever doubt crept in about her own ability, Harold was always there beside her, quietly guiding her, painstakingly explaining each issue, helping her see the bigger picture more clearly. One late afternoon, as soft sunlight streamed through the library windows, Harold approached where Jada sat absorbed in documents, holding another folder, thinner this time and wrapped in a special cover. Jada looked up, surprised by the seriousness and thoughtfulness in his expression. He gently placed the folder on the table and spoke softly but persuasively. "Jada, I think it's time you learned one more important thing. The Winters Foundation is only a small part of what I truly want to build. For years, I've been quietly preparing a larger project, something I've never shared with anyone. I call it the Network of Hope." Jada opened the folder to reveal detailed diagrams, carefully crafted strategic plans, and a vast network spanning communities nationwide. Harold continued, his gaze distant as though he could see the future unfold on those pages. "My idea is to create a system that connects charitable organizations with small communities across the country, so that people in genuine need can be quickly supported by the resources we have. Not just money, but empathy, solidarity, and real hope. Things that money alone cannot measure." Jada turned the pages, feeling more than ever the power and vision behind Harold's plan. She realized this was no ordinary charity project. It was the passion of his life, a dream he had nurtured in secret for years. Her voice rose softly, filled with deep admiration. "That is a wonderful vision, Mr. Winters, but this project is far bigger than the current foundation. It requires a truly exceptional leader, someone who understands the needs of those we aim to help." Harold nodded decisively, his eyes shining with conviction. "Exactly, Jada. I've thought it through carefully. The person I need for this project must have compassion, integrity, and the ability to understand the struggles of the less fortunate. Qualities I see clearly in you. I am certain you are perfect to become the soul of the Network of Hope." Jada looked at Harold, her heart trembling at his heartfelt and resolute words. She had never imagined her life could reach this point, leading a nationwide initiative, a responsibility that once seemed only a distant dream. But now, faced with Harold's earnest offer, she felt her heart fill with determination. "I understand the meaning and weight of this project, Mr. Winters. I am honored by your trust, but I need you to continue guiding me, to help me understand everything I must do," Jada said honestly, her eyes alight with faith mixed with a touch of apprehension. Harold smiled warmly and placed a trusting hand on Jada's shoulder. "I will always stand by you. But remember, you taught me how to trust again. Now it's my turn to place absolute trust in you." With Harold's strong support, the Network of Hope launched swiftly and professionally. Jada soon proved her innate leadership. She met directly with community groups, listened to their hopes and struggles, and then designed practical, effective support programs tailored to their needs. Within months, the Network of Hope had successfully connected hundreds of local charities nationwide, creating an unprecedented wave of assistance. Education initiatives, community health programs, housing support, and vocational training rolled out simultaneously. Jada emphasized transparency and accountability, ensuring every dollar was used appropriately and made a real difference. Each late evening, as the library lights still shone in Harold's mansion, he would quietly stand by the window, watching Jada at work. He knew choosing her had been the best decision of his life. Not only for her outstanding abilities, but because he saw this young woman bringing to life his greatest dream. A world where trust, compassion, and authenticity spread far and wide. Jada had grown step by step, transforming her initial doubts and fears into the driving force propelling her forward. She understood deeply the value of what she was doing and was determined to make the network of hope a resource capable of changing thousands of lives. And for Harold, though he knew he might not see all that Jada would accomplish in the future, witnessing what she had already achieved made him feel more whole than ever before. For Harold, he knew he wouldn't live long enough to see all that Jada might accomplish in the years ahead, but merely witnessing what she had already achieved made his life feel more complete than ever. Yet, just as the light of hope shone brightest, darkness from the past surged back in, bringing monstrous waves that threatened to overwhelm everything Harold and Jada had worked so hard to build. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the library window, Harold's phone began buzzing insistently. It was his personal attorney with Earth, shattering news he'd never expected. "Mr. Winters, your son, Michael, has filed suit in court seeking control of the foundation and alleging that you're mentally unfit, claiming your decision to hand management over to Ms. Harris was illegal." A cold shock ran down Harold's spine. His hand trembled with rage and pain. Michael, the son he had raised with all his love, had returned not out of family loyalty, but driven by greed and bottomless ambition. Harold drew a deep breath, fighting to keep his voice steady despite the bitterness in his heart. "I understand. Prepare all necessary legal documents. I will not allow Michael to hurt anyone else." Within hours, news of the Winters family lawsuit exploded across the media, becoming the subject of intense public scrutiny. Tabloid headlines questioned the foundation's transparency and true motives. Sensational articles insinuated that Harold had been manipulated by the young outsider Jada Harris. This sudden onslaught of pressure left Jada shaken and anxious. Reporters' relentless calls, threatening emails, and skeptical inquiries from donors came crashing in like an unexpected storm. Yet, despite the whirlwind, Jada remained calm and resolute, unwavering in her commitment to the transparency she and Harold had always championed. Then came the day they received the court summons. Harold laid the paper on his desk, determination shining in his eyes. "Jada, this is no longer about money or power. It's about honor, about the legacy we've built together. I won't let Michael destroy it." Jada gently placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady and strong. "I understand, Mr. Winters. We built this foundation on honesty and compassion. I will stand by you no matter how difficult it gets." The legal battle ignited with unprecedented ferocity. Michael, who had long since abandoned his father, returned with a formidable team of lawyers, intent on proving Harold mentally unfit and portraying Jada as an unqualified housekeeper unworthy of running a multi-million-dollar foundation. At the first hearing, Michael swaggered into the courtroom, arrogance and challenge etched on his face. When his eyes met Harold's, Harold felt a pang of pain, but also an unwavering resolve. Michael addressed the court in a cold, mocking tone. "My father is old and no longer in his right mind to make important decisions, and this woman, Jada, is just a nameless housekeeper. How could she possibly be qualified to run a charity worth millions?" All eyes turned to Jada. She rose, her voice calm, strong, and confident echoing through the packed courtroom. "I never asked Mr. Winters to appoint me. He chose me because he recognizes the value of honesty and compassion. Mr. Winters and I have built the Winters Foundation and the network of hope on absolute transparency. We are prepared to present every financial record and legal document to prove it." In the days that followed, Harold and Jada faced a barrage of accusations and skepticism from Michael's legal team. Yet the more they fought, the clearer the truth became. Detailed financial reports and independent audits confirmed that every dollar had been used appropriately for charitable purposes. Jada, with her composure and clarity, faced hundreds of tough questions from opposing counsel without flinching, always answering with full transparency. The greatest challenge came when Michael released a cleverly edited audio clip that sent media and public opinion into a frenzy, one that appeared to show Jada plotting to exploit Harold's wealth. Tabloids ran slanderous stories, whipping the public into outrage. Undeterred, Jada called an impromptu press conference and publicly released the unedited recording. Before hundreds of reporters, she spoke with unwavering conviction. "I stand here to defend the truth, not only for my own honor but for the thousands whom the Winters Foundation assists every day. I am not afraid of any slander or pressure because I know I am doing what is right." Harold sat in the audience, pride and emotion welling in his eyes. He realized that Jada was not just defending her own reputation. She was defending the most precious legacy he had ever created, faith in humanity. Though the battle was far from over, in that moment Harold understood that regardless of the outcome, he had placed his trust in exactly the right person. The young woman who had once entered his life as a humble housekeeper had become the strongest champion of his legacy and honor against the raging tides of the past. The battle was far from over, but in that moment Harold knew that, win or lose, he had placed his power in the right hands. And Jada, the young woman who had entered his life as a humble housekeeper, had become the strongest guardian of his legacy and honor against the old storm. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters, photographers, and a packed gallery of onlookers filled every seat. Harold entered the courtroom with a solemn gait, his face resolute despite the turmoil of the past weeks. Jada walked beside him, her expression calm and determined, her eyes shining with unwavering faith. She knew today would decide everything, the day the full truth would be laid bare before justice and public opinion. Across the aisle, Michael sat flanked by his team of high-powered attorneys, his face smug with confidence that his cunning tactics would topple his father and this unknown young woman. When Michael's eyes met Harold's, Harold felt a sharp pang of regret, not from betrayal, but for a son who had abandoned all sense of morality to greed. The hearing began. Michael's lawyer rose and unleashed a barrage of harsh accusations against Harold and Jada, insisting Harold had been manipulated by an inexperienced, powerless housekeeper. He attacked Harold's age, claiming his mind was no longer sharp enough to make critical decisions. His biting rhetoric sent murmurs through the courtroom. When the plaintiff's team finished, Harold's lawyer stood. In a calm, assured voice, he methodically presented the financial evidence and independent audit reports, meticulously prepared by reputable firms, proving that every dollar had been used appropriately. He highlighted how the Winters Foundation and the Network of Hope had directly aided thousands across the country with complete transparency and accountability. Next, Jada took the witness stand, her eyes steady and her tone clear and confident as she addressed the judge. "I am not here merely to defend my own honor, but to protect the vulnerable individuals who depend on the charitable foundation Mr. Winters and I built together. I have never exploited anyone, least of all Mr. Winters, whom I respect as I would a father. I came to this work with a sincere heart and a single purpose, to bring hope to those in need." The courtroom fell silent as Jada continued, exposing Michael's scheme to doctor the audio tape to frame her falsely. She produced the unedited original, authenticated by forensic experts, irrefutably proving the accusations against her were malicious and baseless. Harold watched in silence, eyes fixed on Jada. In that instant, he realized more than ever that the young woman before him, fighting so fiercely to defend his honor and legacy, was his true family. He understood that real kinship is not defined by blood, but by sincerity, integrity, and unwavering trust. Finally, Harold rose, his voice strong and heartfelt. I admit I have lived in doubt, having lost faith in everyone, even my own family. But Jada Harris taught me how to trust again. She is the most honest, courageous, and steadfast person I have ever known. I am of sound mind and have willingly entrusted her with the leadership of the Winters Foundation and the Network of Hope. I am absolutely certain Jada is the one most worthy. As Harold concluded, the courtroom was moved by the depth of his conviction and the absolute trust he placed in Jada. The judge carefully reviewed the evidence, listened to every testimony, and then delivered the final verdict with authority. Having examined the evidence in full, the court finds all claims against Mr. Harold Winters and Miss Jada Harris to be entirely without merit. The management of the Winters Foundation and the Network of Hope has been lawful, transparent, and genuinely beneficial to society. The court hereby dismisses all of the plaintiff, Michael Winters' demands, orders him to bear all legal costs, and to issue a public apology. The courtroom erupted in relief and celebration from Harold and Jada's supporters. Michael stormed out in anger, his spite powerless now. Harold moved forward and embraced Jada, at last feeling the warmth and closeness of real family. Thank you, Jada, Harold whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. You've shown me what true trust and family really mean. Jada smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes, and replied quietly, You taught me the true meaning of trust and compassion, Mr. Winters. From now on, we are family. In that moment, Harold knew that, no matter what storms life might bring, he would never face them alone again. And Jada understood she had found in him a true father figure, a mentor, and a steadfast partner in life. At last, the truth had triumphed. Honor, trust, and genuine family had been affirmed once more, things Harold had believed he would never find again. Finally, the truth prevailed. Honor, trust, and true family bonds were reaffirmed, things Harold had once believed he'd never find again. After that fateful trial, Harold's life seemed to turn a completely new page. The anxieties and suspicions that had haunted him for years gradually melted away, replaced by a peaceful soul filled with hope. He no longer shied from the gazes or gestures of others, but confidently opened his heart, ready to embrace the genuine trust and affection life offered. Jada, the young woman who had come into his life as a stranger, had become an indispensable part of Harold's world. Not only was she the outstanding leader of the Winters Foundation and the Network of Hope, but she was also the only person he trusted completely. To Harold, true family was no longer defined by blood or title, but by trust, sincerity, and genuine kindness. Under Jada's leadership, the foundation continued to grow steadily and powerfully. A series of charitable projects rolled out nationwide, from building schools for underprivileged children to providing free medical care and creating sustainable job programs for those in need. Beyond financial aid, Jada always emphasized that the foundation's core values were kindness, transparency, and community solidarity. Thanks to these tireless efforts, the Network of Hope gradually spread across the country, connecting hundreds of small communities into an effective and sustainable support system. Jada began appearing more frequently in the media, not to promote herself, but to share a powerful message of compassion, honesty, and faith in humanity. Once, as she prepared for an important speech before thousands, Harold asked her, "Do you ever feel tired, Jada, carrying such a huge responsibility on your shoulders?" With a gentle, sincere smile, she answered firmly, "Whenever I feel weary, I think back to the first day I stepped into your house and all we've overcome together. You taught me that when we do what's right with a sincere heart, we are never truly alone. That is the greatest strength that keeps me going, Mr. Winters." Harold felt a deep warmth in his chest at her words. He no longer feared or doubted the future. Instead, he knew that when tomorrow came, kindness would continue to spread powerfully through the woman he trusted and loved, as if she were his own daughter. Time flowed softly, day by day, planting and spreading faith and hope. The house that had once echoed with suspicion and loneliness now brimmed with laughter, honesty, and love. The library Miriam had loved became the place where Harold and Jada would sit side by side on peaceful afternoons, discussing future plans and how to help even more people. One late afternoon, as the gentle sunset painted the courtyard in warm hues, Harold and Jada sat together on the familiar wooden porch. Harold gazed at the glowing horizon, his eyes filled with peace and fulfillment. "You know, Jada," he said in a warm, reflective voice, "there were times I thought my heart would forever remain closed, that I'd never again trust anyone. But you came along and taught me life's greatest lesson, how to trust." Jada looked at him tenderly and replied softly, "And you taught me that no matter how many hardships or challenges we face, as long as we live with sincerity and strong faith, we will always find a true family, even when there's no blood connection." Harold smiled, gently taking her hand, and together they sat in silence, letting beautiful thoughts drift on the soft evening breeze. Both knew this was not an ending, but a promising new beginning, a journey they would continue together, guided by an unwavering belief in humanity's best values. As night fell and the first stars appeared, Harold and Jada remained there, peaceful and still, their hearts brimming with hope for the future. Deep in his heart, Harold knew that in this new journey he would never be alone again, because he had found a truly trustworthy companion in Jada, a real daughter not by blood, but by trust and genuine affection. And so the story of Harold Winters, the man who once lost faith in humanity, ended with an image of him and Jada looking toward the future, ready to write new tales of hope and trust. The story may have ended, but the journey of faith would continue forever. What about you? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a story like Harold and Jada's? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and share the video with your friends and family to help spread these meaningful messages. And be sure to subscribe so you can join us for more compelling stories to come. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.